One more thing and I'm done. And another thing, used to keep secrets from me. Used to go do stuff, give people money and shit. Wouldn't tell me shit. Used to lie to me.
It started like any other ordinary evening in the quiet Alabama town of Eufaula. April Kelly, a kind-hearted, loving mother and grandmother, had just finished enjoying a peaceful meal with her family. She laughed. She hugged her loved ones, and as always, she reminded everyone how much they meant to her. No one could have imagined that this moment, so full of life, would be their last memory of her, that within hours, everything would change in the most unthinkable way. April Kelly was more than just a name. She was a radiant presence in the lives of everyone around her, deeply compassionate, dependable, and known for her unwavering kindness. The type of person who would drop everything to help a friend or welcome you with a smile no matter how her day was going. She lived her life with purpose and heart, and she carried herself with grace. But on the evening of July 5th, 2022, the warmth she gave so freely was extinguished in a sudden, brutal act that shocked her entire community. What happened to April Kelly wasn't just a tragedy. It was a betrayal so personal. It left even seasoned investigators stunned. As the details slowly emerged, they painted a picture of calculated violence and cold deception. And what made it worse, the person responsible wasn't a stranger. It was someone April had trusted, someone who had shared her home, her space, and even pieces of her life. Someone no one suspected until it was far too late. That night, April vanished. One moment she was there, chatting in the kitchen, and the next, her phone was going unanswered. Her car still in the driveway. Her keys left behind. Something wasn't right. Her family knew it. Her neighbors felt it. And deep down, everyone feared the worst. It wouldn't be long before discovery, just a few miles away, would confirm their darkest fears. April Kelly had been murdered. Her life taken in a chilling act that sent ripples of grief through the hearts of all who knew her. But the horror didn't end with the loss. The case quickly took a dramatic turn when the prime suspect was identified, and it sent shockwaves through the tight-knit Eufaula community. This wasn't a case of random violence or a burglary gone wrong. It was far more personal, far more disturbing. As police pieced together the timeline, what they uncovered revealed a tangled web of toxic relationships, hidden tensions, and a simmering rage that had gone unnoticed until it exploded. Why would someone kill April Kelly? What were the events that led up to that terrible night? And how did a seemingly safe and loving home become the scene of such horror? These are the questions we'll explore in today's video. With every twist and every clue, we'll follow the timeline of this deeply heartbreaking case. One that's not only about justice, but about the devastating impact of domestic violence and the silent struggles many victims face behind closed doors. As we walk through April's story, we'll also hear from her family, their voices raw with emotion, their memories full of warmth and pain. We'll trace the investigation, the arrest, and the courtroom drama that followed. And we'll talk about what this case means, not just for one Alabama town, but for families everywhere. So grab a warm drink, settle in, and stay with us. Because April Kelly's story isn't just a true crime tale. It's a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly love can turn into danger and how important it is to listen, to pay attention, and to speak up. This is a story of a beautiful soul lost too soon, and the fight to ensure her voice is never forgotten. April Kelly wasn't just a name in the headlines. She was a vibrant, spirited young woman, full of life and dreams. At just 18 years old, April had the kind of presence that lit up any room she entered. Friends describe her as kind-hearted, always smiling, and fiercely loyal to the people she loved. Born and raised in Louisiana, she was deeply rooted in her family and community. Her voice, soft yet confident, held a warmth that made others feel safe and seen. April wasn't just another teenager. She was someone with a bright future and a heart that cared deeply for others. April came from a tight-knit family. She was the kind of daughter every parent would be proud of, responsible, respectful, and affectionate. Her relationship with her mother, Nicole, was especially close. The two often shared laughs, late-night talks, and plans of future. April also had a younger brother whom she adored and often looked out for. Her love for her family was evident in everything she did, from helping out at home to celebrating even the smallest achievements with them. At school, April was well-liked by both peers and teachers. She had dreams of becoming a nurse, wanting to help others and make a difference in their lives. It was a career path that matched her nurturing nature and empathetic heart. April wasn't just smart, she was driven. She worked hard in school, balancing her studies with part-time jobs and extracurricular activities. Her friends often joked that she was the mom of the group, the one who always had a plan, a snack, or a comforting word when someone needed it. Despite her sweet and caring nature, April wasn't naive. She had goals and boundaries and didn't let just anyone into her inner circle. But like many young women, she was also navigating the complex world of teenage relationships, trust, and vulnerability. She had recently entered into a relationship with a young man named Dexter Wade, a connection that started off with promise, but eventually turned into something far more troubling than anyone could have imagined. At first, Dexter seemed like a good match. He was charming, attentive, and gave April the kind of attention many girls dream about. April's friends noticed how she lit up whenever he called or texted. But over time, subtle red flags began to emerge. Changes in April's mood, growing isolation from her friends, and a visible strain in her once joyous personality. These signs, unfortunately, didn't raise enough concern until it was too late. Nicole, April's mother, began to notice the shift too. She saw how her daughter's spark was dimming and tried to intervene, encouraging April to open up, reminding her of her worth, and keeping close tabs on her whereabouts. But as is often the case in toxic or manipulative relationships, April was caught in a web that was harder to escape than anyone realized. She wanted to believe in love, in change, in second chances. Looking back, April's life was filled with love, hope, and possibility. Her journey was just beginning, and her story should have continued to unfold with milestones like college graduation, her first apartment, and one day, a family of her own. But instead, her life was cut tragically short. Still, April Kelly's story is not just about the horror of what happened. It's about the beautiful, promising life that was taken far too soon and the legacy of awareness and change she now inspires. April Kelly's relationship with Joseph Scott was, at first glance, like many high school romances, intense, exciting, and seemingly full of promise. They met through mutual friends, and Joseph's charm quickly drew April in. He made her feel special, often showering her with attention and compliments. In the eyes of many, they looked like a happy young couple navigating the typical ups and downs of teenage life. But beneath that surface, subtle red flags were already beginning to show.
Oh, and another thing. Someone please let Robbie Falls, married to Charles Falls, let Robbie know that her husband, Charles Falls, a.k.a. Mr. Chunky, been fucking Joyce Cooper for many, many years behind her back. Peace.
As their relationship progressed, those closest to April started noticing changes in her. She became more withdrawn, often choosing to stay home or spend time exclusively with Joseph instead of her usual group of friends. There were moments when she seemed anxious after texting or talking to him, her once bright spirit dampened by a quiet unease. Friends would later recall instances where she confided that Joseph would get upset if she didn't respond immediately or she wanted to do something without him. Control started creeping into their relationship in ways that initially seemed minor. Him checking her phone, asking about every conversation she had, or subtly criticizing her clothing choices. These were early signs of possessiveness, masked as care. April, like many teens in love, didn't immediately recognize these behaviors as problematic. She believed that Joseph's jealousy was a sign of how much he loved her. Unfortunately, what she saw as passion was the beginning of a dangerous pattern. Over time, Joseph's behavior escalated. He became more emotionally volatile, swinging from loving and apologetic to angry and accusatory in a matter of hours. He would accuse April of cheating, isolate her from friends, and manipulate her emotionally by threatening self-harm if she ever left him. April found herself walking on eggshells, constantly trying to avoid triggering his rage. What had started as a romance was turning into a controlling and emotionally abusive relationship. Despite the growing tension, April held on, likely out of fear, love, and hope that Joseph would change. She may have believed that she could help him, that things would get better with time. It's a tragic reality that many young people in abusive relationships hold on to the good moments, convinced that the lows are temporary. April's heart was big and she cared deeply, but she was also increasingly trapped in a toxic cycle. Several people, including school staff and peers, noticed concerning dynamics. Teachers saw her struggling to focus in class, and friends saw less and less of her outside school. Some tried to intervene, but as is often the case with abusive relationships, it wasn't easy for April to open up fully. Abusers often rely on secrecy and fear to maintain control, and April may have feared backlash if she spoke out. The warning signs were there: the emotional manipulation, the isolation, the jealousy disguised as love. Yet, like many victims of teen dating violence, April likely didn't realize how dangerous the situation had become. She was still just a teenager, navigating love, identity, and high school life, and the adults around her may not have fully understood or recognized the extent of the danger she was in. By the time those closest to her realized how serious the problem had become, it was already too late. April's story serves as a sobering reminder of how teen dating violence often hides in plain sight, cloaked in the language of young love. Recognizing the early signs and acting swiftly could make the difference between a painful breakup and a tragic end. In the final hours of April Kelly's life, the ordinary rhythms of her day gave no hint of the tragedy to come. Like many 19-year-olds, she was navigating the responsibilities of adulthood, balancing work, relationships, and personal goals. She had plans. She had dreams. Friends who saw her earlier that day recalled her being in good spirits, even excited about some upcoming changes. Nothing seemed out of place. But beneath the surface, tension had been brewing, and the man she had once loved was about to shatter everything. As the sun set on that fateful day in 2011, April returned to her North Carolina home, unaware that her ex-boyfriend, Kian, was watching her movements. The relationship had ended, but it hadn't ended peacefully. Kian,
For the record,
refusing to accept that April had moved on,
the TPO
was still
did
trying to
it.
assert control over her life.
You let me
Despite
know.
April's repeated efforts to
really
set boundaries,
don't
his
give a fuck
obsession
about
had
me.
only intensified. Those closest to April had
And I
grown
should've known.
increasingly concerned, and
Because
some had even urged her to seek a restraining order.
we live
She
in the
hadn't.
same house.
Perhaps out of fear, or perhaps
don't
because she
talk.
believed he would eventually leave her alone. But Kian didn't go away.
You work
Instead, he
your
spiraled.
job
In the days leading
all
up to tragedy,
fucking day.
there were signs,
You come home,
unsettling visits, heated
don't say
arguments,
shit
and
to me.
disturbing messages that hinted at something
Nothing.
more sinister. Tragically,
Don't cook
like
for
so
me.
many women caught in cycles of intimate partner
Don't
violence,
even ask me how
April
my day
likely
went.
underestimated how dangerous things had become. That final evening, while she was home alone, Kian entered the apartment. No one
But
knows for
everybody,
sure how
it's
long
your
the
job.
confrontation lasted, or exactly what words were
Oh,
exchanged.
you
But what's clear is that something snapped.
was all
In a
for
moment
that
of
shit.
terrifying rage,
All for
Kian
that
pulled
shit.
out a gun and shot April in the chest.
You was all
Bullet
for your
pierced her
job.
heart. She died almost instantly.
Back when we
Just
did
like
used
that,
to
her
talk,
vibrant,
you come
promising
home
life was
from work
extinguished by someone who
complaining
claimed to
about your
love
job.
her. It was a brutal and senseless
And how
act,
the kids
one that left the community in shock and
were
the
so
family shattered.
unruly.
April never had the chance to cry out, to
Disrespectful.
escape, or to say goodbye.
Just
She was taken in an instant, the victim of a heartbreak turned deadly.
if you didn't want to be
What
married,
makes
just
April's
say that.
case even more heartbreaking is what
Just say
happened
that.
next. Kian,
I needed
the
a
man
wife.
responsible for her death,
I wanted a
didn't
wife.
flee
That's
in
why I
panic
married you.
or remorse.
I wanted a
He
wife.
remained at the scene, as if
But
frozen
it's
in the gravity
so
of what he
easy
had
for
done.
you
When police arrived, he was calm,
bail on me
eerily
when
calm.
times got
He
rough.
confessed almost immediately,
So easy.
telling officers what had happened and why. His lack
I
of
was willing to
emotion
stick it out
stunned
and do whatever I
investigators.
had to do to try to
them,
keep
it seemed
things
he had
going.
planned this all along. April's loved ones were left
But
with
you let your
questions
mama
that
get in
may
your
never be
ear.
fully answered.
And your
Why didn't
auntie get
Kian
in
walk
your
away
ear.
when the relationship ended? Why did he believe that ending her life was a solution? Most painfully of all, could this tragedy have been prevented if warning
I
signs
hate
had been
that this
taken
had
more
to happen.
seriously, or if help had been
I hate
more
it.
readily available? The days following
But you're
April's
not gonna
death were
leave
marked by
me
grief, anger, and reflection.
messed
Her
up
funeral
like
was
this.
filled with young people, Friends,
and
classmates,
bail out.
co-workers, all
Yeah, the
trying to
house was
comprehend
on
how
my
such a
the house
tragedy
is
could
in
happen to
my
someone
name
so full of
only
life.
because her
Her
credit
mother,
was messed up.
devastated, spoke to media,
She
urging
done
other
messed it
young
up
women to
again,
recognize the
even
signs
worse.
of abuse
I got
and
in
take
debt.
every threat seriously. April's death
Dealing with
became more than just a personal loss.
our
It became a
grandkids'
symbol of
mom
a
trying
much
to put a
larger
roof over
issue
her
affecting
head.
communities across the country. This was
And
not
she
just a
going
tragic end to a toxic
messed the little
relationship.
apartment up
It was the outcome of a system that too
over
often
there off
fails
of
to
Lob
protect
Lolly.
young women from intimate partner
Messed it up
violence.
and
April's
beat the
final
apartment
hours were
up
not
and
just the close of one
left,
life.
and
They
all
were a
that shit is
wake-up
on her.
call, a
Trying to
reminder
help
that
her.
love should never hurt. And when it does, we must act swiftly,
And don't get me
seriously, and with
wrong, we
compassion.
both love them
When authorities
grandkids.
arrived at the scene of April Kelly's death, the initial chaos
But at the
gave way
same
to a
time, we
flurry of
wanted our son to
investigative
be a man.
procedures. The crime
his
scene
business.
was cordoned off.
Because he made them.
Detectives began
Not
piecing
us.
together what unfolded in those
I just want to say
terrifying
to my
final
kids, I love
moments
y'all, man.
with her
I know
boyfriend,
some of y'all
Tony
gonna be
Joseph, immediately
a little
identified
mad
as a
at me
suspected perpetrator.
for this.
The
but
investigation narrowed its focus quickly. The
Yo, my
physical
wife.
evidence in the apartment, blood spatters, the weapon, signs of struggle,
husband and wife
painted a
supposed to be
chilling picture.
number one
Officers collected every
Number
shred of
one
forensic data,
to each other.
knowing the emotional weight this case would carry for April's family and the
And now
wider
you want to
community.
leave me?
Tony Joseph, who had fled the scene, was apprehended
To death
shortly
do us
after.
part.
His capture was a relief, but it also opened the door to a deeper probe into what led to the violent act. Detectives started conducting interviews, speaking with neighbors, April's friends, and anyone who had contact with the couple in the days and weeks leading up to the tragedy. They began to uncover troubling patterns in Tony's behavior. Possessiveness, prior altercations, and controlling tendencies that had quietly escalated over time. While April had never filed a formal report, many close to her shared that she had been growing increasingly uneasy in the relationship. As the legal process moved forward, Tony was charged with second-degree murder. Prosecutors believed there was sufficient evidence to prove that the killing was not only intentional, but that it followed a history of abuse and coercive control. While not premeditated in the traditional sense, the fatal stabbing stemmed from a volatile dynamic that had reached a boiling point. The courtroom became a place of both justice and mourning, as April's family sought answers while grappling with unbearable loss. One of the challenges the prosecution faced was painting a complete portrait of April's life and relationship without her voice. They relied on testimony from friends, text messages, and social media posts to illustrate the fear she had begun to experience. These digital breadcrumbs, though small, formed a larger narrative about how April had tried to manage her relationship and perhaps hoped it would improve. Her silence, common among many in abusive relationships, spoke volumes. The court would hear from domestic violence experts who emphasized that emotional abuse often escalates into physical violence, especially when victims try to leave. The defense, on the other hand, leaned on Tony's mental state at the time of the incident, arguing for diminished capacity. They presented evidence that he had a history of mental health struggles, including depression and unresolved trauma. While this did not absolve him of guilt, it added layers to the legal arguments and sparked broader conversations about mental health and accountability. Could more have been done to address his behavior before it turned deadly? Throughout the trial, the courtroom was filled with April supporters wearing purple ribbons, the color for domestic violence awareness. Her family showed immense courage, especially her mother, who gave a heart-wrenching victim impact statement. She spoke not only of April's dreams and light, but also the holes left in their lives by her absence. The pain in her voice echoed through the chamber, making it clear that this was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a cry for justice and change. In the end, the jury found Tony Joseph guilty. The sentence was delivered with a heavy heart, knowing that no number of years behind bars could bring April back. Still, for her loved ones, the conviction was a step toward closure. The judge's final remarks included a somber reflection on the dangers of ignoring red flags in relationships and the need for stronger support systems for victims of intimate partner violence. It was a tragic case, but one that could not be allowed to fade into silence. April Kelly's story became more than a headline. It was a warning, a testament, and a call to action. The legal outcome offered some accountability, but also underscored the urgent need for early intervention, open dialogue about relationship abuse, and greater community involvement in protecting those at risk. Justice, though achieved in the courtroom, needed to continue in how society responded going forward. April Kelly's death shattered her family's world in an instant. Her mother, voice trembling with pain and strength, remembered April as the light of their lives, a woman who loved deeply, laughed freely, and cared immensely for everyone around her. In interviews, she described April's presence as magnetic, saying that her daughter had the kind of smile that made everything feel all right. This wasn't just a loss of a daughter. It was a loss of a confidant, a best friend, and a vibrant soul who held her family together. April's children, too young to fully comprehend the gravity of what happened, are now growing up with a hole in their hearts. Family members shared how April always made time for her kids, even after a long day at work. She would tuck them in with bedtime stories and silly songs, little rituals that now live only in memory. Her mother now speaks for her in vigils and public interviews, fighting for justice not just for April, but for every woman who has suffered silently. The community in Jacksonville, Florida, where April lived and died, responded to tragedy with an outpouring of love, heartbreak, and support. Candlelight vigils were held. Balloons were released into the sky in her honor. People who had never even met April came out to mourn her, their faces etched with the pain of knowing another woman had been taken too soon. The collective grief was real, and it quickly turned into a community-wide cry for change. Friends and former co-workers stepped forward to share their stories of April. One described her as sunshine in human form, while another recounted how April once stayed late after work just to help her through a difficult time. Their stories painted a fuller picture of a woman who was not only dedicated and hardworking, but deeply compassionate. One friend said, "She made you feel like your pain mattered. And now, we're all carrying the weight of hers." Faith leaders and local activists also began to speak out, highlighting the need to break the silence surrounding intimate partner violence. April's story is not just a personal tragedy. One pastor said at a memorial, "It's a public reckoning." They used her death as a call to examine the social norms that allow abuse to thrive in secret, and the systems that too often fail to intervene in time. For many, April became a symbol, not just a loss, but the urgent need for transformation. Social media became a powerful platform for remembrance and resistance. Hashtags like #JusticeForApril began trending locally, with hundreds of people posting photos, memories, and words of love. One post read, "We failed her, but we won't forget her." These online spaces gave voice to the grief and outrage that many felt but didn't know how to express. April's name became more than a headline. It became a movement. In the months following April's death, her family remained fiercely vocal, attending every court hearing, speaking at domestic violence awareness events, and holding signs with her photo and the words, "She deserved to live." Their strength was a testament to the love they had for her and the pain they now carry. They vowed not to let her be reduced to just another statistic. Through their unwavering presence, they are ensuring that April's story continues to be heard. Perhaps most moving of all was the word of April's young daughter, spoken during one of the vigils. "I miss my mommy every day. I hope people remember how kind she was." In that one sentence, the entire weight of the tragedy came crashing down. April Kelly's story is not just about how she died. It's about who she was and how deeply she was loved. The heartbreaking story of April Kelly is more than just a personal tragedy. It's a window into deeper, systemic issues that plague communities across the country. One of the most glaring is the persistent silence and shame surrounding domestic violence. For many victims like April, the danger isn't always visible in the signals, if noticed all, are often brushed off as relationship issues. We must begin addressing the culture that normalizes toxic behaviors and discourages victims from speaking up or seeking help. Another pressing theme is the lack of proactive legal intervention in domestic situations that are clearly escalating. In April's case, there were warning signs and concerning behaviors from her ex-partner, but no protective legal mechanisms kicked in fast enough. Restraining orders and police reports can be critical, but only if they're enforced and treated seriously. We need a justice system that doesn't just respond after a tragedy, but works actively to prevent one. Mental health, particularly in relationships with a history of manipulation or control, is another theme that cannot be ignored. Abusers often use psychological tactics that isolate and confuse their victims, making it hard for them to leave or even recognize the severity of a situation. These patterns aren't always easy to spot, especially when they develop over time, but they can be deadly. Communities need better education around these dynamics so people can recognize them early and offer real support. Additionally, the concept of post-breakup violence needs more attention. Leaving a relationship doesn't always guarantee safety. In fact, for many victims, the period right after breakup is the most dangerous time. April's case is a devastating example of this. Her decision to move on was met with lethal consequences, showing that freedom from abuse isn't always straightforward or safe. Society must shift from blaming victims for staying to supporting them when they leave. The lack of safe, confidential, and readily available support resources is another gap that must be addressed. Shelters, hotlines, counseling, legal aid, these services can mean the difference between life and death, but they're often underfunded, inaccessible, or unknown to those who need them most. If we are truly committed to preventing tragedies like April's, we must invest in these life-saving services at the community level. It's also essential to discuss how community awareness plays a role in prevention. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, and family members all form a circle around those who are suffering in silence. If we're educated on the signs of abuse and know how to intervene safely and supportively, we can be the first line of defense. A more informed community is a more protective one. This case also raises questions about how domestic violence is portrayed in media. Often, it's dramatized or reduced to a sensational story. But these are real lives with real consequences. April wasn't just a victim. She was a vibrant woman, a mother, a sister, a friend. We owe it to her and others like her to tell these stories with compassion, context, and a clear call to action. Finally, there is a broader societal need to shift how we view control, jealousy, and possessiveness in relationships. These behaviors are too often misinterpreted as passion or commitment. In reality, they are early red flags of abuse. As a society, we must unlearn romanticized notions of love that equate control with care. Real love respects autonomy. Real love is safe. And real change begins when we all agree on that truth. April Kelly's story, though heartbreaking, should not be where the conversation ends. In fact, this is exactly where it should begin. Every viewer, every listener, and every person who hears her name has a part to play in reshaping the narrative of domestic violence in our communities. No one should ever feel trapped, afraid, or isolated in a relationship that should bring peace and safety. April's case urges us to look inward and outward, to examine how we support others and what systems we can reinforce to prevent future tragedies. One of the most important things we can do is listen. Survivors of domestic abuse often drop hints or cry out in ways that don't seem loud enough to most. Sometimes they speak in subtle phrases like, "he's just protective," or "he gets jealous," and other times they go quiet altogether. It's our job to create safe spaces where victims feel believed and supported. This means listening without judgment, validating their fears, and gently reminding them that help exists, even when they can't see it yet. Beyond listening, we need to educate ourselves and others. Knowing the signs of emotional, physical, and psychological abuse empowers us to intervene early. Support organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline provide resources for victims and those trying to help. Schools, workplaces, and religious centers should all be equipped to handle these delicate situations. Change begins when awareness turns into action. Community support groups play an instrumental role in healing and prevention, whether it's through local outreach programs, therapy groups, or advocacy networks. Coming together makes a difference. In April's honor, let us continue the work of breaking cycles, encouraging community leaders, influencers, and everyday citizens to speak up, donate, volunteer, and get involved in reshaping safety nets for at-risk individuals. We must also demand better from our justice systems. April had previously sought help from the courts, and yet she still faced deadly consequences. This is not an isolated failure. It reflects a system that needs overhaul. Let's push for legislation that holds abusers accountable and prioritizes the safety of victims above all else. Let's advocate for consistent enforcement of protection orders and faster emergency response times. Social media can be a powerful ally in this fight. Share April's story. Share resources. Share hotline numbers. Use hashtags. Organize digital campaigns. Bring attention to the women and men who can't speak anymore. Awareness, when amplified online, can ripple through society, reaching people who need it most. If you're watching this and feeling hopeless, know that you're not alone. If you're in a dangerous situation, there's help. Confide in a friend, a family member, a counselor, or a crisis center. And if you're someone who's safe, consider being that lifeline for someone else. You may never know how much just one conversation could mean. April Kelly's life mattered. And while we cannot bring her back, we can carry her legacy forward by becoming advocates for change, protectors of the vulnerable, and builders of a more compassionate society. Let her story ignite something powerful within us. Not just sadness, but purpose. As we close the story of April Kelly, we are left not only with heartbreak, but also with a deep sense of urgency. April's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was a preventable loss that speaks volumes about the societal gaps in protecting victims of domestic violence. Her story shines a spotlight on the ways women, especially Black women, are often left to navigate dangerous relationships without adequate support, attention, or intervention from the systems meant to keep them safe. This reflection is not about pointing fingers, but about acknowledging where we can do better as a society. April was more than a statistic. She was a woman filled with life, love, and the desire to protect those she cared about. Her dreams, her laughter, her future, all were stolen in one violent moment. But in honoring her, we must also take her story as a call to action. We must not allow her name to fade into silence. Instead, let April Kelly's legacy be one that inspires meaningful change. That change begins with every person who hears her story and chooses to act by listening, speaking out, or supporting someone in need. In reflecting on this case, we must also confront the complexity of relationships where love and danger are intertwined. It's never easy to understand why someone stays, or how violence escalates behind closed doors. But what we must understand is that victims are never to blame. Our role as bystanders, friends, neighbors, and even strangers is to recognize the signs, to extend compassion, and offer help before tragedy strikes. The emotional toll of April's story lingers because it mirrors the experiences of so many others whose cries went unheard. Her family's pain, her child's loss, and the community's mourning are echoes of a larger epidemic of domestic violence that must be addressed with more than words. It requires action, investment, and unwavering public attention. Let April's life remind us to value the living while there's still time. Reach out to those you love. Ask hard questions. Offer support without judgment. Sometimes, a single moment of kindness or courage can change the course of someone's life, or even save it. We owe that effort to April, and we owe it to every person silently enduring harm behind a smile. To those who knew and loved April, we hope this retelling of her story brings some measure of justice to her memory. Your voices matter. Your grief is seen, and your fight to keep her legacy alive is deeply respected. May you find healing in the love and support of others, and strength in the knowledge that April's name will not be forgotten. And to every viewer, thank you for watching and caring. Share this story. Talk about it. Learn from it. And let April Kelly's life and death be a turning point for us all. She deserved a future. Let's make sure others still have theirs.